starting with the economy, the numbers are really bad. This week, just 23% of voters tell us that their personal finances are getting better. 39% say worse. That's a negative net 16, right? Net negative 16. That's down from negative 10 a couple of weeks ago, but even that doesn't explain how bad these numbers are. The last time we saw pessimism this high was shortly after President Trump announced Liberation Day. There was all that panic right around when the tariffs were first announced and eventually got past it. The last time before that we saw numbers this negative were right on the eve of President Trump's victory in 2024. These numbers look a lot like they did for Joe Biden late in his administration. And look, if these numbers continue to decline, or even if they hold where they are right now, it's going to be really pessimistic, a really bad night for the Republicans in November. Now, this may seem odd because there's some pundits out there saying things are looking a little better for the Republicans right now. You know, they're not that far down the generic ballot. Larry Sabato's ratings, Charlie Cook's ratings, Inside Elections, when they're estimating who's going to win how many seats in the House, all three of them say there are more seats leaning in the Republican direction than in the Democratic direction. So if you look at Sabato's numbers, he says something like 213 seats are at least leaning Republican. The Republicans only need to win 5 out of 16 toss-ups to keep control. Cook's numbers are similar. Inside Elections are even a little more optimistic. The problem with all that is those leaner categories. Look, if the economy doesn't improve, if the way people feel about their personal finances doesn't improve, what you're going to see in the next couple of months is those races that are currently rated as toss-ups will move into the lean Democrat column. The races that are currently lean Republican are going to move into the toss-up category. There is simply no way the Republicans are going to keep the House unless perceptions of the economy improve. One other tidbit to give you a sense of just how unhappy people are with Congress. And look, they're always cynical about Congress, so you don't want to overstate this. But we asked voters, suppose you had a choice to replace or keep the entire Congress. Would you throw them all out and start over again, or would you keep everybody in place? By a 68-13 margin, they said, get rid of them all. Let's start anew. That's a bad sign if you're the party that's in control. And by the way, most voters also think that a randomly selected group of people would do a better job than the current Congress. Okay, on to space travel. SpaceX is viewed favorably by 56% of voters, more so by Republicans than Democrats, just because it's Elon Musk's company. But we wanted to go in a little different direction. Part of this probably because it was an infatuation of mine as a kid. I loved the space program. I would love to go into orbit. So we asked the American people, if you could go into space, orbit the Earth, and it cost you nothing, would you do it? Only 34% said yes. I'm like, what's wrong with you people? This would be so cool. Now, some of the demographics make sense. Men are a little more likely than women to say they'd do it. Older voters, less likely to want to go into space. And since I'm in that category, I do get some of the health concerns. But even among voters under 45, fewer than half would want to go into space. That was kind of surprising to me. Another thing that we wanted to check were some of Musk's predictions about the future. We asked people to think about the world in 50 years. Will everyday Americans be able to travel in space in 50 years? Will there be vacation packages to the moon? Now, the numbers are pretty soft. Not a lot of people had strong opinions on either side, but it was pretty evenly divided. 45% said, yeah, we'll be taking vacations to the moon. 47% said that's not going to happen. There was a little less belief in the idea that in half a century, we will have colonies on the moon. Now, I don't know what's going to happen, obviously, and I'm not going to be here in 50 years. Elon Musk is planning to retire on Mars, but I think a lot of times these situations we can't really envision the future till it's right in our face. It's going to be fascinating to watch in the next couple of decades. And by the way, 31% of voters think SpaceX will be the first to get men and women to Mars. Now, finally, I want to take another look at the Scott Pelley story, and I really want to do it from a whole different angle. In my book, I talk about a theme called the Great Turnaround. From the beginning of America up until the 1970s, everything became more centralized, became bigger. By the 1970s, you had three television networks controlling 94% of the primetime audience. That was a great world for elite gatekeepers. It was a great world for the administrative state because they could control the narrative. When CBS would do a show in those days, in 1978 was the first time it ever topped the ratings. It attracted about 40 million people in a nation with just 78 million households. So it could not only set the narrative of what was news, but how the news would be talked about. Less than a year after 60 Minutes first hit the top of the ratings, ESPN went on the air. It was followed by CNN and MTV and all kinds of cable networks. And the big networks kind of laughed at these challengers, couldn't imagine it would have any impact. But what they didn't know is starting with those changes, the great turnaround was in place. Instead of getting bigger and bigger and more centralized, we were moving to a more decentralized nation. The gatekeepers were losing control. Within a decade and a half or so, 60 Minutes lost half of its audience. It was down to about 20 million. And then you had the internet and streaming platforms, smartphones and social media. The world where CBS or any show could set the narrative doesn't exist anymore. To give you a sense of scale, since 1978, America's adult population has nearly doubled. But in raw numbers, the 60 Minutes audience has fallen by more than 75%. What amazes me is the arguments that we hear today about with liberals saying it's the gold standard and conservatives saying it's biased. They're the same arguments we heard in the 70s, but the world is different. When you look at the Scott Pelley debate, the 60 Minutes debate, and all the people who are passionately fighting for it right now, I think the best way to consider it is like an episode of Seinfeld. It's a debate about nothing. It's a show about nothing. Or at least the arguments about Scott Pelley and 60 Minutes are an argument about nothing that will define the future of America.